Great. Well, I think we're all here. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this joint Bright Blue Water UK Party Conference Fringe event titled H20 CO2, How Water Can Help Deliver Net Zero Emissions. My name's Patrick Hall. I am an energy and environment researcher here at Bright Blue, and I will be chairing the panel today. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, Bright Blue is an independent think tank and pressure group for liberal conservatism, and we're actually going to be having a major relaunch this autumn, so do keep an eye out for that. We have several research themes, including domestic, social, educational, environmental, and economic policy. We've also launched a new magazine for this year's party conference as well, examining the impact of COVID-19 on our family and social lives, and it includes an interview with the Treasury Minister, Jessie Norman. You can read this online at our website, brightblue.org.uk. If you're going to tweet about this event, then please do using the hashtag BrightBlue, all one word lowercase, and hashtag CPC20. And you can follow us. Our Twitter handle is @WeAreBrightBlue, all one word. You can also follow Water UK on Twitter. Their Twitter handle is @WaterUK. You'll be able to ask questions to our panelists via Slido, and I will put those questions to the panel when we get to the Q&A segment of today's discussion. To introduce our speakers with us today, we're joined by Jo Gideon. Jo is the Parliamentary Private Secretary to the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and she's also the Conservative MP for Stoke-on-Trent Central. Tony Juniper joins us as well. Tony is the chair of Natural England. He is a campaigner, writer, sustainability advisor, and leading British environmentalist. Fiona Harvey will be joining us at some stage today. She has been having a few connectivity issues, but we may see her at some point during this panel. Fiona is an award-winning environment journalist for The Guardian. Previously, she has worked for the Financial Times for 10 years. And Christine McGourty is the Chief Executive of Water UK. Christine joins us as well. Previously, she led the corporate affairs functions at Centrica, British Gas and Energy UK, as well as serving as a non-executive board member at Smart Energy GB, and myself, who will be chairing the panel. I'll just briefly go through the key questions that our panelists are going to be discussing today in their opening remarks shortly for the benefit of the audience. Today, we're asking, what has the impact of COVID-19 been on the sustainability of water? How can water and energy efficiency jointly be improved? What steps is the water industry taking or should be taking to reach net zero emissions by 2030? Are there synergies with other sectors that can be realised and learning shared to reduce emissions? And finally, how can nature-based solutions help to reach net zero and deliver biodiversity net gain? I'm going to hand over to Jo Gideon now to begin her opening remarks. If you could keep your remarks to the sort of 5 minutes as a guideline. So Jo, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So tackling environmental challenges really requires a long-term approach and political commitment. Next year we'll be hosting COP26, and we'll seek to ensure international action on climate change using our leadership role to encourage greater global ambition for target setting. In 2019, we put into law the commitment to reach net zero by 2050, and it requires ambitious, radical policies by government, business and individuals to achieve these changes. The government's commitment to build back better and build back greener recognises that we have to decarbonise our economy as soon as we realistically can, and we have to develop cost-effective pathways to create green jobs across our country. The Green Recovery Plan is essential for the environment, but it's also really important to create new sustainable economic opportunities. It's not business versus the environment. It's backing business opportunities that arise from new technologies and practices and new energy sources that improve the environment. So when we look at water, I mean, the water sector as a whole uses a lot of energy by pumping and cleaning water, and it's promised to be carbon neutral by 2030. So how should we be supporting the water sector to achieve these very ambitious targets? I think that we need to praise the good practice. We're very keen to criticise, and sometimes we do need to criticise, but it's also important to highlight the really key things that are going on. We need to be exploring government strategic advice to Ofwat and other regulators to make sure that the decarbonisation programme is happening. And we need to look at the replacement for the Common Agricultural Policy policy to encourage more sustainable land use, including tree planting and more biodiversity. And I think rivers and canals play an absolutely key part in that. And government has a role to ensure that we have the right green infrastructure in this country, from carbon capture and exchange to electric charging points. In terms of the impact of COVID, I think obviously while people stay at home and are isolating, there is greater water usage. And I know that Ofwat and Water UK are working together to look at the impact of that. We need to create better design in our new builds to ensure that we have the highest green standards, but including things like water recycling. Rainwater could be used to flush toilets and water gardens, not just tap water. I know meters have a part to play. In terms of what water companies are doing, I do think there's a huge problem with leakage, but I know that that's being addressed and it has been reducing over time. We just need to tackle it more. Personally, one of my bugbears is still the amount of bottled water that we're drinking. Our tap water the quality is second to none, and I do believe that we will eliminate far more plastic by using tap water rather than drinking. So there is an awful lot to be done, but I think we'll come back to that as the discussion progresses. So I'll happily hand over to my colleagues at this point.
Great. Thank you very much for those remarks, Joe. Tony, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. I just want to open with the observation that we face three major challenges in relation to the water environment. Number one, too much of it temporarily in the wrong place all at once, flooding. Two, the effects of drought and there being a scarcity of water. And three, the quality of our water environment in terms of its chemical and ecological status. And of course, all of these things have been massively in the news this year, and indeed flooding is back on the agenda today. We had a period during the spring and summer when it didn't rain for a long time and some parts of the country faced water stress. And of course, we had the recent report telling us that no river in England now has a good status from the chemical point of view. Now, all of these things, historically, we have approached with engineering, quite rightly, the construction of sewage works to protect water quality, the building of flood defences to protect communities from too much water all at once, and of course reservoirs that catch some of the water between rain and it going back to the sea in order that we can store it for human use. Now, all of these things are absolutely essential, but if we are going to approach the biodiversity and climate challenge in a joined up and integrated way, we need to complement those engineering solutions with nature-based solutions alongside them. And you can see already, because we're doing some of this across the country, and Natural England's delighted to be involved with many initiatives, including with water companies, to demonstrate what's possible and hopefully now to begin to get scale for some of those solutions. For example, wetlands are fantastic at addressing all three of these problems. Wetlands recharge aquifers so that we can get more water for public supply in the future. They help to reduce flood risk, and they also help to improve the chemical status of rivers, including those wetlands created by beavers. Similarly with trees, the right trees in the right place. Many people now arguing for some of our tree planting effort to be targeted at river valleys to protect for all of those same three reasons: to improve quality, cut flood risk, and also to store water in the environment. And of course, there is the agricultural dimension and the extent to which agricultural soils contribute to good outcomes in relation to those three headings. Soils that are rich in organic matter, they hold more water. That's actually not only good for reducing flood risk, it's also good from the point of view of drought resistance for crops. And indeed, high organic soils, they hold something like 20 times more water than where the organic matter is depleted. And of course, the more that soils are holding water, the better the quality that's eventually getting into rivers. If we are going to go down this approach of trying to harness nature-based solutions, which I think we must do, then we're going to need to integrate a whole range of new tools that we've got across the country. We have the new Environmental Land Management Scheme. We have the tree planting target with budget behind that. We have ambitions for peatland restoration, and wrapped around all of that, we have the ambition to create a nature recovery network. And this is really at the heart of Natural England's work at the moment. And what we would like to do is to blend all of those different tools into that nature recovery network to get the kind of joined up solutions that we know are possible, because some people are already doing them. I recently was with Anglian Water in the field up in Norfolk, seeing them creating wetlands next to a sewage treatment works to get the residual pollution out of the treated water in a way which is much cheaper and lower carbon than would be the case if they only invested in engineering. Severn Trent Water, I was in the field with them recently, seeing partnerships that they're developing with farmers and conservation groups to improve the ecological quality of different habitats and farmland. And of course, the more that we can pull these tools, not only into integrating different policies, but through creating public-private partnerships to take some of the water companies' investment into these nature-based solutions, then I think that would be absolutely the right way to go. And thinking of global leadership, yes, COP26 is coming, and the carbon dimension of land is essential to get right, and hooking up with water is a really good way to do that. But recognise that globally, freshwater habitats are the most threatened of all terrestrial ecosystems, with freshwater fish being the most endangered. And, you know, sometimes we might look to the Amazon or to the Rift Valley lakes and see those as the global priorities. We've actually got quite a few here as well, including the parlous state of our chalk streams. 90% of the world's chalk streams are in England. And of course, our wonderful blanket bogs that clothe so much of the uplands, those are a globally significant habitat too. And I was delighted this week to hear the Prime Minister at the United Nations announce our intent to have 30% of our land and seas protected by 2030. If we can take that headline target, as we have done on climate change, and turn that into a leadership agenda here in the UK, I think that will give us a fantastic springboard for major meetings next year. And as I say, the more we can pull all of these different tools together, recognizing the fundamentals of land and water and how they interact with one another, then our carbon and biodiversity targets would be so much easier to achieve, at the same time as bringing economic and social resilience to the country.
Thanks very much, Tony. It's really insightful, interesting stuff. I'm going to hand over now to Christine.
Thank you, Patrick. Really delighted to be here with partnering with Bright Blue, and also on the panel with the other distinguished speakers on this critical topic that's really important. The crisis is on everyone's minds and in all of the headlines, and I think everyone would agree it's made us really value some of the things that previously we'd taken for granted, whether that is social life, friends, family, just going outdoors, the environment and nature. And water companies know they are in a unique position of custodians of this precious national resource. And through the start of the pandemic, all the companies came together to collaborate to make absolutely sure that there was a resilient service throughout all of the summer. Now that was very successfully managed, and water and wastewater supplies resilient throughout. And what we want to do now is ensure we are absolutely playing our part in building back better, in a green economic recovery that will accelerate investments and create jobs. We've made a series of public commitments that really together express the core public purpose of the water sector. And a key part of that is this ambitious commitment, which Joe Gideon referred to achieve net zero carbon as an industry by 2030. Now, some steps have been taken already over the last decade by individual companies. There's been a lot of progress, but what we're doing now is joining forces so that together we can further and faster than any company could achieve alone. So we believe actually it's the first net zero commitment for an industry of its type in the UK and perhaps globally. We'll be publishing the detailed technical review and roadmap next month. But overall, that target is going to have to be met by a combination of things such as water efficiency, energy reduction, new technologies, and as Tony referred to, more nature-based solutions. Now, it's a collective goal, but individually, companies in different regions are going to find their individual path forward. In Northumbria, for example, which is wetter than East Anglia, so Anglian water, Northumbrian water will have different challenges, but we'll work together to this common goal. One key opportunity, for example, is generating biomethane as an alternative to fuel, to heat houses and to power cars. A key focus area for us, as you would, is water efficiency, and we would love some policy support from government. Just thinking, for example, of a national watering scheme, for example, so that people develop a water efficiency awareness like that already exists to a certain extent for energy efficiency. So for taps, showers, other domestic appliances, so people could know what they were buying, and also minimum standards for appliances too. We'd also love to see stronger water efficiency regulations for new buildings. So these are just some of the areas where together we could make more progress. The industry has come together this year to launch a new consumer-facing campaign called Water's Worth Saving, and we hope that will help raise awareness of the water that we're using. So there's a real sense of purpose, a real sense of excitement collectively in the industry at what we need to achieve around this challenge, and we won't achieve it alone, so we're looking forward to working with government, Natural England, and all the other stakeholders who together will help us get there. Thanks, Patrick.
Thanks very much, Christine. I thought I'd just ask, for many people, they may think about the water industry and the environment in terms of water abstraction from rivers or chalk streams, but many may not be so familiar with water's contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. So perhaps just to enlighten our viewers, what would you say is the water industry's contribution to carbon emissions?
Well, yeah, as the others have said, it is quite a carbon-intensive industry, and need to change. And in fact, so it's not just treating the water, for example. Tony referred to the concrete. There are embedded carbon emissions in the concrete they use to build reservoirs and other schemes. So there's a lot of carbon that you don't see actually when you turn on the tap and see the water coming out of the tap or flushing the toilet. There's quite a lot of water carbon used, and we're working very hard to get that down. One really interesting example actually is that one that Tony referred to, using wetlands to actually treat water, so harnessing the natural environment in a very low carbon way, which would be new, and that's exactly the kind of thing that could reduce emissions that we currently get from water treatment works. So there are lots of innovative ideas and a lot of work lies ahead of us.
Great, thanks, Christine. I thought I'd just touch on a point that you made in your opening remarks about improving water efficiency through things such as product labelling and minimum efficiency standards for products. Joe, I was wondering, is this something that the government's considering, or is this something that perhaps the government would be likely to consider in future?
I mean, certainly anything that leads to greater efficiencies is something that is on the table. And I agree with what has just been said about the labelling that we have in other energy, smart meters and gas and electric. I think people are more aware of than than water energy efficiency. But it's also very much about, and this is where our building back greener certainly comes into play. The specification for new house building has to include measures that make people more aware and that water is a key part in the building of new houses. So looking at, for instance, bathrooms, when you're installing a new bathroom, I don't know how many people think of, it's sort of shower versus bath, but also the size of the bath and if it's insulated or not probably means that you'll use less water. All those things, I think, play a key role. And it's not just government, it's individuals, because I think that there does need to be a greater awareness campaign for individuals to make those better choices.
Great, thank you, Jo. We've got a few questions coming in here now from the audience. We've got a question here from Melanie Shadbolt, which says, less than 1/5 of England's rivers are healthy. The majority of chalk streams are also found in England. This is quite talking to your point, Tony. Are water companies doing enough to protect chalk streams and rivers? Tony, perhaps you'd be best placed to answer this, and then maybe Christine, you'd like to speak after Tony as well.
Well, so chalk rivers, they have very pure water in them, and so it's tempting in those parts of the country on chalk geology to get our water from those places because it is pure. But of course, this then has impacts on river flow as a result of water flowing down taps and showers rather than through the rivers. And so this does raise some really big questions. Part of it is about water efficiency and the extent to which we can be reducing demand. But I do think that in some parts of the country, we need more reservoir capacity. Quite a lot of the rain that we have causing flooding goes straight through the system and out to the sea, so that by the time we get to the summer, it's gone. So if we could be storing more water, then we could be reducing the need to be taking water from aquifers. And I know this is part of the thinking that Thames Water have for their new Abingdon reservoir to be able to take pressure off of the River Kennet. And so I do think we need more of that. And I know that major infrastructure is always a controversial thing when it comes near to particular communities. But I do think that we now know enough to be able to do this in a really good way. So one of the places I love to visit is Rutland Water, which in the 1970s was farmland, but which is now a water storage asset owned by Anglian Water, which is of enormous value to the community in terms of recreation and tourism. There's a great fishery there for recreational fishing. And also, this was a place where we reintroduced the osprey back into England. And, as I say, back in the early 70s, there was nothing there at all except farmland, but now a multi-purpose water storage asset that is taking pressure off of other places where we otherwise would need to get water from. So, it's a multi-layered problem, but I do see the chalk streams as a huge priority for us because, nearly all of them in the world are right here. And there's good evidence to suggest now that some of the salmon populations in Britain are, they're a distinct race, the ones that live in the southern chalk streams. And so a particular global responsibility really right there, but it's going to require some big thinking to sort that one out. I think people's focus is on it now. And I do think, some of the recent campaigning that various organisations have been doing is helping to raise the profile, but we need to join all these things together.
And Christine was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that too. Are water companies doing enough to protect chalk streams and rivers?
Well, there is always more to do. There's no question about that. It's worth stepping back though and just reflecting that on the progress that's been made. That's not to understate the challenge ahead of us, for sure. It's a big one. But there has been a lot of progress in the last 10 years. I think since the mid-1990s, I think the number of serious pollution incidents in rivers is down something like 90%. Now, but we've got to look forward, and the whole industry is committed to doing more. And certainly, I think 5 billion allocated spend between 2020 and 2025. So you are going to see a lot more going on. One thing that's worth just saying is that actually, while the companies will certainly be doing more, there is a education piece here. Quite a lot of the incidents are created by sewer blockages. Now, the sewer blockages are created by all of us because a lot of them are due to the very basic fact of stuff being flushed down the toilet that shouldn't be. You know, we've all heard of the fatbergs, but you know, when stuff is flushed down the toilet and things like greases and fats and oils get into the system, those cause major problems, which lead to blockages, which lead to spillages, which lead to damage to the environment. So there is an element where, yes, of course, the industry will play its part and will do more. And there's a consumer education piece here. Beforehand, I talked about reducing, each of us committing to reducing our water consumption and being more water efficient. And it's a part of that education piece, individually taking responsibility a little bit for our own behaviour as well. But the water companies absolutely accept that while there is standout performance, and we saw it recently with a number of companies, Wessex Water, Severn Trent, being 4 stars in the environmental performance. There is some great work going on, but we know there's more to do.
Can I just add something on that? I know that Environment Minister Rebecca Powell is particularly concerned about the challenge of chalk streams, and I believe that she's hosting a chalk stream summit on October the 16th, where she's invited the water companies to come and explore what more can be done.
Yeah, that's right. And the other thing to mention on that is that, as Tony also referred to, the work that's going on the weeks, actually, one company, Fiona, which has streams in this area, announced a big step forward in reducing their own abstractions from these precious chalk streams. So the companies are very well aware, acutely aware of this responsibility that they have, and they are taking steps forward to protect that precious natural resource, which is as Tony said, you know, in England, it's a global, it's a resource for the planet. Really, it's unique, and that is absolutely recognised. And the companies will certainly be attending that summit with the minister to discuss what more can be done.
Great, thank you, Christine. I'm just going to pause Q&A for a second here and bring in Fiona. Fiona, can you hear us all right? I think Fiona might still be having some connectivity issues. Okay, in which case we will just resume with the Q&A as we were. But another question here from Derek Brown. It asks, should we be insisting on more regulation of water companies who seem to be just focused on making a profit? I don't know whether perhaps Joe or Christine, you'd like to answer this question?
I'll let Christine have a go first.
Okay, Christine.
Of course, it's that's a question that is often raised, and quite rightly. Coming in new to the industry, though, I should just say, before I joined the industry, I had a 20-year career in science and environment journalism, beginning at the science journal Nature, and then covering science and environment issues for various Telegraph, BBC, etc. for a long time, including going to the Antarctica to study climate change with the British Antarctic Survey. And I mentioned that only because when I came into the industry just a year ago, what really struck me is that there is a real, the environmental issues and the environmental mission is in the very DNA of the water company, the people who work in these companies, scientists, and this is their passion. You know, they treat the environment as if it was one of their customers, you know, look after it, protect it, enhance it and pass it on for future generations. Now, and that is genuinely struck me when I joined the industry and went around the country meeting the people who are responsible for this precious resource. So there is a huge amount of effort going in to protect and advance and improve the environment. One of the things I did when I joined, it's my instinct, is to look back through time, and I went right back to a book written by the eminent journalist and writer Fred Pearce, who's been writing about our rivers for maybe 50 years. Now, I was looking through his book on the water sector pre-privatization, and it wasn't a pretty picture. You can still get some of his fantastic books going back to the 1980s, and it's a real eye-opener. There is not a glory 30 years ago where things, things were not better, and the country was starved, and the resource then that it needed to invest in our environment. And really big strides forward have been taken since then. And as I said, there's more yet to do.
Yeah, I think we know the Environment Agency says that every single river, lake and stream in England is polluted, but we can't, blame the water companies for that. Clearly, if there's pollutants like chemical sewage, discharge farming and industrial chemicals. So, and water quality hasn't deteriorated. It just hasn't improved as we'd hoped. But, I spoke to my local water company, Severn Trent, and they are committed to achieving their net zero in the next 10 years. And they're well underway with renewable energy from sewage, switching to a fleet of electric cars and planting 1.3 million trees over the next 5 years. So there has been a lot of investment from water companies. As I understand, there's a 5 billion water industry environment programme, which absolutely aims to step up and to make it more sort of outcome focused and to make the accountability of water companies greater. So I do think, as I said in my opening remarks, that we have to recognise that there's a lot of good work happening. We just have to look at how we can support that good work, and also, where things need to change, how we can put pressure on.
Patrick, may I just add a short remark on that subject, on the water quality and the environment. The regulatory side of it is essential in terms of sewage outfalls and industry and everything else. But the thing we've really got to wrap our arms around now is agriculture, because this is the thing that is causing the most widespread source of diffuse pollution, nutrients getting into watercourses, chemical pollution from pesticides in some cases, and also soil particles. And this is where I think the land and water join up is most essential, is in relation to agricultural policy and how we target some of these new ambitions we've got around tree planting. If we do that right, then we'll be able to work in synergy with what the water companies are doing. And as I said before, the public-private partnership side of this, it strikes me as essential, so that the 3 billion that's coming from elms, for example, can be linked into the 5 billion that's coming from the water industry. Because if you put those two budgets together, you're going to get much more out of them than deploying them in isolation from each other. It's quite tricky to do that, but I think if we ask that question, how, then maybe we make more progress.
Great, thank you, Tony, and thank you, Joe and Christine, as well, for your answers too. Fiona, are you back with us now? Are you able to hear us? Okay. Not sure Fiona has a stable connection, so we'll carry on with the Q&A regardless. I've got a lot of questions.
Patrick, your sound has gone now here.
Oh, sorry, you can hear me?
You're back again, that's it.
Brilliant, sorry about that. I've got a lot of questions coming through regarding water efficiency labelling and minimum product standards, but Christine and Joe, you have touched on that already. Another question here from Michael Woodhouse asks, should customers be expected to pay more for their water in order to deliver positive environmental outcomes? Perhaps Christine and Joe, you'd like to address that question.
Yeah, Patrick, a couple of things. I think there was a survey actually done by Bright Blue, wasn't there, just last week about consumer attitudes to spending on water, and that was really interesting. And the companies, as part of their proposals every year, their business plans that have to go to the regulator, do a huge amount of engagement. They all have customer panels. And as part of that cycle of 5-year business planning, they do huge exercises in customer consultation. And some of them are certainly showing that the environment is hugely important to everybody. It's never been higher up the agenda than it has in the last few years. And of course, especially in the current climate with the challenges of the economy, everyone is very conscious of the cost of our daily essentials. Water bills are actually, on average, coming down this year and over the next 5 years. But those customer surveys that some of the companies have been doing, all of the companies have been doing, certainly the answers around them have shown a willingness to pay more to protect the environment. And it's a really difficult balance, isn't it? Is consumers now, what consumers pay now and what consumers may have to pay in future? You know, how do you get the balance right? But we could certainly be storing up problems for the future if our focus now is solely on bringing customer bills down now. We certainly need to find the right balance between what consumers and customers pay now and in the future, and the investment that is absolutely needed. It's 5 billion is going to be spent over the next 5 years on environmental improvements, and that, you know, with the twin challenges of population and climate change ahead, the challenge is only going to get bigger. So it's absolutely the right question we need to keep asking.
So I think it's an interesting question. I think that people are very much aware of the environmental imperative to use less water. Maybe they need more help knowing how they can achieve that with, changing their behaviours, if you like.
Yeah.
I have to say, I learned only yesterday that it's not advisable to use a washing machine or a dishwasher when there's heavy rainfall outside, because that puts pressure on. And, you know, we've talked about the overflowing sewage and the environmental impact that has. So it's really about probably less usage rather than it being cheaper. So, you know, I think we could stick with the same cost for less water, and the savings from that could then be invested in environmental improvements.
Yeah, Patrick, just on this cost point and consumer costs, quite important, I think, just to stand back a bit and just to register the extent to which, you know, we're paying more for our water than we need to, through the extent to which, you know, we've been subsidising a certain style of agriculture for decades, which has led to pollution of the water environment. That has meant that, you know, not only have we been using the public purse to support that agriculture, but then also through water bills paying to remove the pollution that's resulted, and that then creates a cost which is passed on to the consumer. And so I think if we take a more integrated approach to the overall economics of this, you know, it may be that we find that it isn't much more expensive to have very high environmental outcomes at the same time as secure water, if only we can take that more integrated approach and deploy these different budgets in a more complementary way, rather than having one causing costs in another, if you see what I mean.
I've got another question here which actually ties in somewhat to what you were saying, Christine. This is from Andrew Probus, says, last year's price review by Ofwat was quite restrictive on water companies. Are water companies feeling supported by the regulator? Christine, I don't know whether you wanted to, sort of, as the voice of the water industry, speak to that, and then perhaps Joe and Tony, you'd like to come in afterwards.
This is a very live issue. It's one that the Competition and Markets Authority actually published its provisional findings looking at this challenging issue, one of them being precisely this, the balance of how much should customer bills be in order to invest in the resilience we need for the long-term future. So those were only provisional findings, and the final ones will be out in December. So I think everyone will be poring over the 800 pages of those to see precisely what they tell us. But there certainly was a high-level message from the CMA that applied to those 4 companies that there should be more money available to invest in the resilience that that customers have said they want for the long term. So I know that Ofwat will be, of course, looking at that, and the environment is certainly one of their priorities. With both Ofwat and they're the economic regulator, and with the Environment Agency as the environment regulator, everyone is looking together at schemes like WINEP, which is a very big environmental investment scheme, to see how do we get there's a task force that's set up to look at that together and see what changes need to be made to that in order to do more of these nature-based solutions going forward. And I know that the regulators are very keen to support those outcome-based solutions that will protect and enhance the environment.
Great. I don't know, Joe, Tony, whether you want to speak to that point. Otherwise, we've got some more questions here.
Let's do another one, shall we?
Okay, sure. Got quite a Malthusian question here from Bernard Toombs. Asks, do we need to reduce the population? That's surely the answer to many of our environmental problems. Tony, your thoughts?
Reducing the population. Well, I'm not sure how you'd go about that. And I think in most democracies, the idea of getting rid of people probably wouldn't go down very well with the voters. So maybe it's an interesting thought experiment, but probably one that's not really viable in the real world. I think what we have to do at a global level is acknowledge that population growth is, of course, a massive environmental issue. It's one of the most fundamental. But actually, in the real world, where that we have to find the means of looking after all of those people. It's not a question that really has a lot of practical solutions. Whereas if we focus on the consumption side, that is where we can find some very important synergies between what people do and environmental outcomes. And the whole point mentioned today about efficiency of water use, well, the same goes for everything else: raw materials, energy, land. That's where we have to focus in the light of the population growth. Having said that, there are things we can do about reducing future population growth, and the thing that has emerged at the global level as most significant there is education. And we know that in those parts of the world where there has been a strong investment in secondary education, especially for young women, then the population growth rate does start to go down. But the idea of reducing population, I don't really see that there's any possibility for that, really, not in any kind of acceptable way. Like, I can't see it.
Thank you, Tony. And if any of the others, if you want to chime in, then do so. Otherwise, I will move to the next question we have from Daniel K. Asks, what more should be done to address misconnected drains to stop them polluting our waterways? I might go to you again on this one, Tony, and then Christine or Joe, feel free to chime in afterwards.
Well, I know that quite a few of the water companies spend quite a lot of time trying to identify these misconnected sewers and things that aren't on any of their kind of infrastructure maps. Christine probably in a better position to say, the scale of the challenge. But I know from some of my work with Thames Water years ago that they do put a lot of effort into trying to tidy up these things, which, decades old, not on any maps, and, cowboy plumbing operations, people connecting to the wrong pipe with raw sewage then going into rivers, and it takes a while to find it and then to reconnect in a way which is going to put those materials into the proper treatment system. But a huge challenge, as I understand it, and I guess more of a challenge where you have more buildings close to properties. But Christine probably knows more about that one.
Yeah, it's a big challenge, and the disruption, you're absolutely right, Tony, is enormous. So, nobody likes it when they see their street being dug up, and that's where that's sometimes what you have to do to try and put these problems right, which might be decades or more old. So it's a big challenge, and all the water companies are working on it. There are practical things that we can do to help us with all the other problems that we've talked about when it comes to sewers. So I think that's, I talked about the blockages that are caused simply by education. We talked a little bit about education already. And I think although the companies will absolutely continue to invest tens of millions in tackling these things like the misconnections, all of us can do our little bit every single day by thinking about the water we use, and to put it bluntly, thinking about what we're flushing down the toilets, because wet wipes is the bane of our lives in the water industry. Very, very few of them are flushable. They're very, very modern, very convenient, but they are a really big cause of the blockages in our sewers, unfortunately. So that's my plea to everyone today. Don't flush them anywhere down your toilet. Thank you.
Great. We've got some more questions here. David Eckel asks, mixed hedgerows between fields absorb CO2 and prevent the risk of flooding. How can we encourage farmers to plant more trees on their land? Tony, I think you're probably best placed to address that question.
Yeah, so there is obviously an enormous amount of work going in now in DEFRA and at Natural England and other agencies to try and understand how we can use these new tools we've got in the form of the Environmental Land Management Scheme and the Nature for Climate Fund, and how we can blend that in to different kinds of partnerships with landowners and water companies and NGOs to be able to put more woodland and tree cover and hedgerows back into the landscape. It's not simple, but I think now, that there is an understanding that these things bring a multitude of benefits that we're talking about today: carbon, water quality, biodiversity, landscape beauty, public access and well-being, and health and well-being. So that there are some great prizes to be achieved, but we now need to work on the plans and the rules for the allocation of those funds. At the same time, of course, as protecting food security. Actually, one of the things that I've been very positively struck by during my time as chair of Natural England is how the farming community really is getting its head round about the challenge of keeping food production up at the same time as restoring nature into the landscape. And one farmer, for example, I met in Suffolk recently, has discovered through high technology, so GPS monitoring of the fields in terms of where they're putting the inputs in and where the food is coming out, that some bits of the farm are much more productive than others, and the very low productivity areas should be the places where we're targeting assistance for tree cover, grasslands, putting in new hedgerows, thereby getting those natural capital benefits with having a minimal impact on the food production side, and actually in the end it being a good business decision, because if you're not paying to put chemicals or use diesel on those low productivity areas and they're being targeted for tree cover instead, then it really does start to add up as a good business choice. So trying to reflect some of that kind of thinking into how we go forward, I think, has huge potential. And as I say, the appetite of farmers definitely is there now. And over the coming months, DEFRA will be publishing the conclusions of this initial period of thinking, and hopefully coming forward with the schemes that can start turning that into reality.
Great, thank you, Tony. I've got another question coming in here from Charles Bradfield. Do the proposals for the Office of Environmental Protection go far enough on water conservation and protection? Joe, maybe I'll go to you on this, and Tony and Christine, do feel free to chime in as well if you want to. I think you might be on mute there, Joe.
Sorry, I was going to say I think somebody from DEFRA might be a better place to answer that particular question. So I'm going to hand over to Tony. I think he's probably more of an expert on this.
Sure.
Well, not so much, Joe, but I'm broadly aware of the direction of thinking. So the Office for Environmental Protection, for those who've not been following all of this, this will be one of our post-Brexit moves to replace one of the functions that we had via the European Commission and the European Court of Justice, which was to uphold environmental rules in the UK. And so we will continue to have environmental laws, and we will continue to have environmental ambition. And so having a watchdog body that can hold government and its official agencies to account is going to be an essential part of us meeting the very ambitious goals we've set ourselves for nature recovery, for sustainable agriculture, for net zero and all these other things. And so I know that the team at DEFRA has been working on the detail of this. I've not been close to it, so can't really comment on where we've reached, except to say that it is going to be a critical part of the post-Brexit machinery to making sure that the UK can do what it says it wants to do and to be the kind of global leader that we need the UK to be. So we're watching that space and looking forward to working with the OEP when it's set up as part of that government body of agencies that can help meet these goals that we're now turning into policy and law.
What I would say, Patrick, just to build on what Tony said, is that we're very clear that leaving the EU does not in any way, shape or form mean lowering standards. And there's been a lot of discussion in Westminster about, the new agriculture bill and the environment bill. And, I and all the other MPs are absolutely sure that there is no question of a lowering of standards. I mean, certainly, we had high standards before we were in the EU. We maintain those high standards, and we absolutely want to be world leaders in this. So that's a given.
Great, thank you both. I'm just mindful of time. We've got 7 minutes left. We do have quite a few questions here, so perhaps we'll take two more before drawing things to a close. I've got a question here from an anonymous party member, but it asks, what measures are being looked at in terms of innovation to make it easier for individual householders to make the best use of grey water? Christine, perhaps you'd like to answer that.
Well, you're absolutely right. There's lots of innovation in this area. I should just say, though, that without needing to be very high tech or innovative, a lot of us could make a big difference simply by getting a water butt in your garden. So, literally, that's basically just a big bucket. And if you had a big bucket in the garden collecting rainwater, and then use that to water the garden, I'm not suggesting use it indoors, but use it in the garden for plants, that would save a lot in terms of the water that we're all using outdoors. It was one of the things that really peaked over the summer during really hot period in May, when there was a bit of a heat wave, certainly in the south of England, and people couldn't go anywhere. So they were all in their gardens, getting around to DIY jobs they hadn't done in a while, sprinklers on for hours on end, jet washers being used on cars, all really understandable, because there wasn't much else to do, to be honest. No. Those jet washers and sprinklers used more in a few hours than a family uses in a couple of days. So there's a lot that we can be that can be done with more simple technology to use the water coming out of the skies better. But absolutely, there is a lot of innovation going on. In fact, we published just last week a new innovation strategy for the whole water industry. And that is going to and has produced a lot of really interesting themes and ideas. And as we roll that out over the next few years, there'll be more coming along.
Great, thank you, Christine. I think we will have time for one more question, just quickly. This is from Sonal Noble, asks, as part of the integrated system solution, can collaborative relationships assist with reducing the CO2 emissions, e.g. water companies sharing resources? Christine, I think I might go to you again on this one.
Patrick, you're cutting out a little bit. Could you run me through that one again?
Sorry, so the question asks, as part of the integrated system solution, can collaborative relationships assist with reducing CO2 emissions, e.g. water companies sharing resources?
Well, collaboration is absolutely, absolutely front and center of everything that we do in the industry. Although there are different companies in different regions, we're working together all the time. You know, river catchments can run across several different companies. So I would just say that all the issues that we've talked about today require collaboration, and the water industry is doing precisely that in all its environmental areas that it works with all our stakeholders, and with all of these innovations and these nature-based solutions we talked about today. Collaboration within the industry and outside of it. And Tony has talked, for example, eloquently about the challenges in agriculture. You know, the water industry alone cannot solve these challenges. Pollutants are coming from industry, from mining, from agriculture, runoff from roads. This is a joint problem that needs joint solutions, absolutely.
Okay, I think I'm just mindful of time here. The joys of the digital format, I don't think we can go past our allocated time slot before the live stream disconnects. So I'm going to have to bring the event to a close, unfortunately. We did have a few more questions, but we'll have to visit those another time. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Thank you to Water UK for sponsoring this event and for partnering with us. And thank you to all of you for being brilliant speakers. So you can sign up to become a member of Bright Blue on our website, brightblue.org.uk. We are running 15 fringe events at this party conference, which will take place in the designated Bright Blue space. The next event of which is going to be starting in half an hour with National Grid ESO discussing achieving net zero and how to ensure local communities aren't left behind in the transition to a greener economy. So we hope to see you all there. Thanks very much, everyone.